My Right is a free program here in Bed-Stuy where I teach students literacy through songwriting. The idea came about back when I was a teacher at Brownsville Middle School. And I had this one student who was just so talented. Her name is Shai. She could sing, she could rap, she could write, she could do everything. She was like a little Lauryn Hill. And she was like 13 at the time. And she was doing all of this by herself. I asked her, like, how are you writing these songs? She's like, things just come to me in my head. And for me, I really related to that because back when I was younger, I used to write songs myself. And I was much younger. I was 8 years old when I wrote my first song. And I went on the internet using my dial-up, and I found a talent show where I could actually perform because I'm such a Leo, so I had to just be the center of attention. So I found this talent show that I made my parents drag me to, where I sang and performed my original song. And since then, I was writing songs when I was younger. I was always doing stuff to entertain the block, my parents, and anyone who would listen to me. And by the time middle school came around, I was more concerned with being cool, and no one that I knew was writing songs or doing anything like that. So I put that to the side. And for me, I kind of when I thought about it, kind of regretted that because I wish that I just had somebody to support me or to show me a pathway with what I was doing. I didn't know that anything like that existed. I just knew I was writing songs for fun. And so My Right became a space for me to give to students what I wish I had when I was a young little Addie. So by the age of 3, middle class to upper middle class students or young children know 30 million more words than lower class students or children really. And that's a huge problem because when we think about the way that we learn, a lot of that, our learning happens with our relationship to language. So if we enter the same space and I'm at a 30 million word deficit than you, then obviously as we're going through school and learning things, you're just going to be absorbing things much faster than me because the connections you're making are going to just be that much greater. And so for a lot of students growing up in lower income neighborhoods, access to language is really scarce. And it's not until students go to school that they see the type of language that's acceptable, the type of language that is appropriate, standard, and they're forced to measure up to those standards when that is not their reality. And what happens is as you get older, it's harder for you to learn those new words. The way our brains work, those synapses in our brains that are dancing or whatever when we're younger, they start to slow down and eventually just stop altogether. So there's a lot of intervention happening right now in education around early childhood education. How do we intervene in pre-K? How do we get kids early, which makes a lot of sense because this is the time in which you could have the most significant impact in terms of your brain development. However, there's a huge gap in the conversation in terms of what we can do for preteens and adolescents and actually older teens whose brains are still developing, but just not as rapidly as our younger people. When I think about the way I learned vocabulary back in school, it was here's these 5 words and use them in a sentence and then use them in a paragraph. And then you never use them again. No one I knew was using those words. So the thought of bridging the gap between vocabulary and music for me is it makes so much sense because it's when I think about things that we repeat all the time, it's music. So the same idea is that if I'm writing my own song and I feel personally connected to the message that I'm writing, I'm in control of it, it's my story, and I'm taking words that would otherwise be intangible for me, words that no one around me really uses, but are words that allegedly are going to help me move forward in my career, my education, academically, then that's a great opportunity to just learn that and to really apply it. So I wanted to create this space for students to get that opportunity. I first started My Right, and that started back when I was in a classroom at a school as a school teacher. I had a lot of students who experienced just a lot of things growing up in the neighborhood that they grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Definitely one of the toughest neighborhoods in New York City. Brownsville, Brooklyn actually has the highest concentration of housing projects in the entire country. So, and within 1 mile radius, you have so many people living on top of each other. And what happens and what comes out of that could, is definitely like not always healthy for our students. And so they would come to school with just a lot of things on their chest. And we were then expected to teach them. They were expected to receive information, information that had nothing to do with how they were going to get food on the table that night, information that had nothing to do with how they were going to keep their family at peace. And so when all that is just weighing on you and you don't really have an outlet to put it down, you start to carry it in everything that you do. It's difficult to learn because you're thinking about a million other things, and these are kids that we're talking about. Kids shouldn't have to think about all of these heavy things that they have to think about. So the great thing about just writing music and about writing in general is getting all that down somewhere. Sometimes you just need a place to put it. And I felt like it was therapy, because it was a great space for our students to just like be themselves. There was no boundaries in terms of what they could write. They could talk about just about anything. And we created a safe space where everyone felt comfortable with sharing. That's another great thing about music. Even though I was the instructor, I was sitting there doing the same activities as my kids, because there's no I'm better than you because I have X more years of experience. Talent is talent, creativity is creativity, and we can all meet each other in the middle around that, as long as we're open and honest. So it was just a really cathartic experience. My third year of teaching, I was definitely not in like the best place. I kept on thinking about like my life, my career, and like what I wanted to accomplish. It was around that time, back in 2016, that I realized that, no, I really do want to pursue songwriting. I want to actually create music. And then it made me feel guilty too. I felt guilty because I was like, I love kids, so I don't want to like leave teaching because I don't want to leave kids. And for me, it was like, how could I find a way to bridge the gap between the two things that I love the most? I didn't know actually at the time that that's what was happening. So while I was pursuing my own career as a songwriter, writing songs, performing, and all of that, and really building my own confidence as an artist, simultaneously, my kids were giving me the courage to do the same and to put back into myself. So what I was giving to them, they were giving right back to me. And this just started, in my classroom. It was in January, so like months after the school year had started. I didn't get any approval for an official club, so it was over my lunch break. I would just have kids come into my classroom and we just create music, and sometimes they stay after school and we work on it. So we just had a really good time, and by the end of the year we were able to perform for the other kids. But I started to really put the pieces together that, wow, like I don't have to give up one thing in order to achieve the other. I can actively pursue my own dreams and then be that path and be that vehicle and that support system for other students to achieve their dreams too. And for me, I didn't have to put one above the other. My write sessions are fun. We talk a lot about what music means to us, and then we actually create it. So the first part of a My Write music session is going to be me just tapping the kids' brains about what do they like about music. So if they think about the songs that they're listening to all the time, what is catchy to them? What do they like about the songs that they listen to? What do they not like about some songs that they don't listen to? And then how can we really pull out what are they getting from it? Because a lot of times kids are really applying really academic lenses to the way that they interpret music. I was just at a school where like kid was telling me, oh, if the melody's trash, then I'm not doing it, or I'm not listening to it, or if the person's singing off beat, I don't want to hear it. And all of that is really, it's really intelligent for you to even recognize when something is offbeat. So there's a lot of things that kids don't realize that they're doing because they're not naming it, but it's happening. So I want to pull out what they can bring to the table. We have a discussion about it, talk about it, and then really start to define ourselves as what kind of artists we want to be. So I have students really map that out for themselves, because for me, my space is all about being open and not having boundaries and no censorship. I want kids to be able to write whatever they want to write, but I also want them to consider the type of brand that they're trying to put out there. If you want to be the bang bang shoot 'em up person, cool, but you have to make a decision. Is that who you want to be? So I want kids to really work on defining who they are. And the irony is it's a program about defining words and vocabulary, but it's kind of like that, because it's just like you can't wait for anybody to tell you who you are. You have to decide who you are, and if you're not there yet, who do you want to be? And then from there, we can start to really build out the type of art that you put out into the world. So that's like the first part of the session, is just a lot of that character development, unpacking a lot of things about who you are, the things that you've gone through, free writing. The next part of the session is really building confidence. Like, how do we get students who, teens really, adolescents who are not always super open with their peers all the time if they don't want to be, because, you don't want to look uncool. How do we really like level out the playing field? So one thing that I do that's really cool with the freestyle session, I have freestyle sessions with the kids. And so the first round of the freestyle sessions will go around, but like, you can't rhyme. And the idea behind that is that sometimes you have so much pressure to just like make it sound good. And like, for a lot of kids, it sounding good means that like it rhymes. And sometimes that can be stifling, because then you stop to really you stop telling your story when you're so focused on the expectations. And we're trying to pull back from those expectations. And in a session that I did, in which the students were just kind of freestyling and not worrying about the rhymes, they came up with they actually did end up rhyming, which was really funny. They all ended up rhyming, but so much better because they weren't thinking about it. So there's a lot of really cool strategies that we're trying to, introduce to kids, just to get them feeling confident and feeling safe in the space that we're in. Okay, so when I first started my write, a lot of my inspiration came from one of my young students named Shai, who was just super talented, triple threat. And pretty much by the end of our few months working together, for the first session of my write, she was able to create songs that she was able to use to apply to high school. She was applying to high school at the time, so she was able to transfer some of those records over to like show these people who were judging in these performing arts high schools. And so she got accepted into a couple of performing arts programs, and she's currently in a performing arts program right now. That's really nice. And another thing that's been helpful is that like my students have been able to just really feel confident about like creating music, because sometimes it's difficult when you're younger, because you're so used to just getting validation numerically. Like, you have this grade, this tells you that you're on the right track. Your parents are telling you you're good, so then you're on the right track. But sometimes it's really hard to just know that you're good, especially when you're so new to it and you're young in it. So it was just great. It was a great space for them to really develop their own creative skill sets, and to develop their craft in a place in which they were able to feel safe and heard and also validated. And I think that a lot of the value of them coming out on the other end of that was just being able to feel confident that I'm a rapper, I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter, I'm all of that, and own it, because that's like the first step in anything. I left the classroom, when I first started my write, began in my classroom, really just as an idea, as a concept that just kind of blossomed into something bigger. And I think the challenges are communicating to like different stakeholders. So on one hand, you have like the education world, which is like, oh wow, like kids are learning vocabulary, that they're really focused on that, right? They love that. And then for kids, they want to create music, and so there's definitely like some tension there. Because if I'm telling a kid about it, first of all, they're looking at me like, girl, you ain't no rapper. You look like somebody's teacher. And talking to younger kids, it's just like, I have to kind of convince them that this is going to be a space in which they can really just actually express themselves, but they're also going to be learning and not even realizing it, right? And so it's just how do I market it to kids in the best way that doesn't make them feel like it's school again? Because that's not what it is at all. And and then on the other hand, for teachers, communicating to them that it is a space for students to be openly creative, to not be censored, it is not school, and to have them communicate those correct messages to the kids as well. But then also for me to be really clear about the pathway for students to learn and to grow out of this experience. So I love it because I always believe in just like having a balanced type of life, just being well-rounded in everything that you do. So one thing that I always highlight to kids when I show them, or when I try to convince them to join, is that all of their favorite rappers, Jay-Z, Eminem, Kanye West, they all live in the dictionary, and they don't always tell you that, but these people read. They either read the dictionary explicitly, or they're reading a lot of books and they're gaining that vocabulary anyway. So they're gaining that naturally. So here's just another pathway for you to just be gaining that vocabulary and for you to retain that, so that when it comes up on a test, when it, as you can use it through your life to improve your vocabulary and get opportunities that you probably wouldn't necessarily have if you didn't have that vocabulary. Like, there's just a lot of benefit for students. One time, a student and I were writing a song, and I'd written the first verse of the song. She wrote the second verse of the song. We kind of collaborated on the chorus. Mostly I did that. But the last part of the song, I wanted it to kind of be a dialogue between two friends. So I said, okay, wait till tomorrow. We're going to work on it together. Then I come in the next day, and she's like, Miss Allow, Miss Allow. I'm like, what? She's like, I was sleeping, and then it just came to me. And then she sang to me what she wrote, and it was brilliant. Like, it was so good. And like, till this day, when I play this song for any of my friends, they're like, oh, the song is good, but that last part is really, really dope. And I'm like, oh, wow, I had nothing to do with that. And for me, that's just a testament to the fact that, yeah, I've been doing this longer than all of my students. However, they can always add value, and the value they can add can be greater than anything that they could have ever expected of themselves. It can be greater than any adult who's done it for millions of years. It doesn't matter. There's no real time frame on creativity. Experience helps, because it helps you to refine the things that work and the things that don't work. But there is something to be said about just having a natural aptitude and just being really passionate about your creative pursuits that can get you anywhere. So that's something I just love. I just love that she wrote it.